Hello, I'm the Smoking Cheddar, but you probably already knew that. So, the unit build for today is an RL. This was requested. What sort of builds can we do with an RL? And I spent about 2 weeks trying to think to myself, well, we could do this, we could do that, we could do this, that, and the other. Now, I use an RL, and I will be the first to admit that they are pretty useless to a certain degree. So, I've decided to look at what they're good at and how we can improve upon those things. So what do we know about the RL? Well, we know it counters the infantry very effectively. We know that if it selects a new target, its initial load time is initially quite low, especially if you have the tech. We know that the subsequent shots are incredibly high. We know this is a very weak unit, but we also know it's a very fast unit. So what sort of unit can we how can we build this unit around that knowledge? So I think this is going to be a hit and style run artillery piece. Now I say I think. Now normally we start off with a scenario. This time we're going to wedge the scenario in. And that's because this is similar to how I use my RL currently. Now I use my RL as a field piece, as a hit and run piece. We'll go through my battle reports in a couple of seconds and we'll have a look and show you what it does defensively and offensively. And if I can find one where it was out in the field, we can also compare a third one. But I won't make any promises to that because the L4 is over and I have a lot of battle reports and I'm not going to spend an hour sifting through them just to show you some good ones. So, as always, make sure you got yourself a drink, some snacks, and your missus is watching some. I don't. What are women watching these days? I don't know. If you do know, leave a comment in the section in the comment section down below. I don't know what they're watching. It's definitely not me, that's for sure. Yeah, make sure your headphones are in. You're nice and comfy, and we're gonna go into a unit build on the RL. The counter battery. Okay, so here is where my base was destroyed, and we can see that the defensive gun sitting in the top underneath the infantry is doing 68 and 77. We've got the siege gun doing 55 and 38. We have the ATG pulling in 42 and 28, and we have the RL pulling in at 52 and 38, bringing it on par with the siege gun. So it's not terrible in terms of what it can yield in a defensive scenario. However, it is worthy of mention that it is very, very dependent on what they're throwing at you. And not only what they're throwing at you, what your base then targets after the initial soak unit has been destroyed. So here we've got 88 kills compared to the 115 kills from the main artillery gun, and obviously whenever a unit is destroyed, you will target a new unit, which will then reset the cooldowns for your targeting and load time, which means the RL is going to fire before anything else. So it makes sense the RL is actually going to have less kills because it's going to be the first one to fire out of the 4 defensive guns in this scenario. So this is just something that's worthy of mentioning in terms of what the capability for an RL is potentially. I'll see if I can find one where I'm attacking a base next. Okay, so here we can see a base attack, and we've then killed the enemy units that are inside. And we can see that we've done 70 and 80 compared to the 42 and 29. Now, at the time this battle report was recorded, the siege gun was an 8.2, so even an 8.2 siege gun is going to outpace your RL quite significantly. And we also have another battle report after this one, so we can see the difference. Here we only got 200 kills, so we're going to get less damage on the chart, and you can see we've got 28 and 35 to no kills. So the RL, obviously I used it to destroy the base, and that is the actual damage it was dealing to the base. Probably wasn't a very tough base by the fact that it only lasted 30 seconds and I only lost 17 infantry. So against weaker bases, we can see even then it's still not keeping up with even the defensive gun. But as we can see here, the defensive gun did score a few kills, which is why I wanted to bring up this one as well, because in this one, the defensive gun also scored kills. And you can see in this scenario, it was keeping pace. So the RL is going to deal damage equivalency to a defensive artillery piece, but in defense it is going to deal damage equivalency to a siege piece. So it sits irritatingly on the low end of mediocre for both of these scenarios, which is a problem because this thing could potentially be really good. So we've had a look at some battle reports. Let's just have a quick look at the unit before we move on to the tech and the officers. So obviously this is the unit proper. So we've got siege capable of dealing high damage to fortifications. So this is obviously including infantry while they're in bunkers, which is why this is such a good defensive unit if you are being attacked by infantry. We've got calibration rounds. After locking onto a target, the blast damage of normal attacks is increased by 150%. From the second attack onwards, lasts until a new target is selected or the troop stops attacking. So we can increase the blast damage. So things like MBTs are going to get hurt by this, but it has to be over subsequent shots. And as we've already discussed, the follow-up shot for the RLs is pretty low. The load time is low, so we're gonna think about that going forwards. Massive explosion deals blast damage to all visible units in the same map grid. Visible units in the same map grid. So if you can see 8 tanks, we're hitting 8 tanks. If you can see however like 40 odd infantry as they're running around, that's what you're hitting. If you're seeing 2 super heavies, you're hitting 2 super heavies. Regardless of whether they deals damage to all enemies visible within the same map grid, regardless of whether their direct attack hits the target, also deals a small amount of damage to enemies within one grid. So we have a spillover damage, a splash damage that is going to exit the grid and hit adjacent grids. This is why this is a pretty good defensive unit if you do stack it for defensives, because it has a natural splash attached to it, which you can then capitalize on with defensive officers. Obviously the downside being that, well, it's an RL, so the damage output is going to be significantly lower. However, if you do take defensive officers in the field, as we know, if you have, for example, Stinger Fist, if you have Argent Flame and Stinger Fist, we know both of these guys have splash damage skill attacks, so that's gonna, it's gonna be good. Is it going to be better than using a standard artillery piece off the initial attack? No, but it is what it is. It's a very awkward. This is a very awkward unit to use. So we'll look at the advanced combat first. As always, we're going to look at the pictured text, see what we can learn from this. Then we'll pick up things that we potentially want to max out ahead of getting the tree completed, and then we'll go on to the modern technology. So we'll start at the top, which is God of War. When your artillery attacks, there is a 10% chance the next load time will be reduced by 40%. This is significantly important because, as we know, the subsequent attacks from the RL, they just suck. You've got to wait for an extra loading time on them, and they're just terrible. Off-road trucks reduces the load time for rocket launchers' first reload by 1 second. So this is really good because we're looking at reducing that initial loading time down to 2 seconds rather than 3, which then means your first shot from your first artillery piece, if you have multiple, if you have an RL in there, it's nearly always going to be the RL. This is going to be a case of do as I say, not as I do. Yes, I don't have artillery load time reduction maxed out yet, but you will need this if you are planning on using an RL as a main unit, because load time reduction for the subsequent shots is where we're going to be focusing most of our attention. We'll also need to pick up firing accuracy. The RL is notorious for letting the odd missile go astray. Blast damage mitigation. Now, as the name suggests, we are looking very specifically at making this a counter battery piece, i.e. we're going to be using it in the field to snipe enemy artillery. This is going to be important because when we get hit by enemy artillery, we want to be able to survive. Notice how I leaned forward there. And this is also going to be highly important because we're looking at damage intensity. As always, they're two sides of the same coin. We're going to need to increase our resistance and blast damage mitigation while increasing our damage intensity, so we have effectively a deadlier rocket launcher. Naturally, we're going to need the HP because this is going to be predominantly field orientated, much like mine is. And we're going to need the artillery firepower because obviously firepower affects both the damage, load times, and also I believe the accuracy off the top of my head. Now we can pick up the other damage intensity bonuses versus the tanks and the infantry, but for the sake of argument for this video, we are solely looking at being able to use the RL in the field to maneuver quickly and snipe enemy RLs and enemy artillery pieces. So on to the modern technology. We have alloy barrels here. Each time the rocket launcher troop fires, its load time is reduced by 0.2 seconds up to 0.4. Not particularly fantastic, but still, nonetheless, it's going to be handy if you need to fire a follow-up shot. Let me get my words in a muddle there. Obviously, we're going to need to max out artillery damage resistance. So when we're being attacked by enemy artillery, we want our RL to be just a little bit tougher. Artillery HP because we're going out in the field. Again, artillery firepower. Artillery blast mitigation bonus is going to be an absolute need. And again, we have HP and we have firepower. So let's just take a look quickly at the stats that we have at our disposal. Here we have a blast damage radius. We also have a personal damage multiplier. So if we're hitting enemy personnel, we're getting a bonus multiplier of up to 200%. We're also getting a fortification damage multiplier of 350%. Now, as I've said many times before, infantry, when they're in bunker mode, count as a fortification. So you are getting a 350% bonus while they're in bunker mode, and when they're running around, you're getting a 200% bonus against the personnel, but you must remember that the bonus to splash damage within the grid, whether you hit the unit or not, is multiplied in the case of the RL, as we discussed slightly earlier on in this video from the journal. We've also got an average firing rate here, an average firing accuracy, but to be perfectly honest, we could ignore most of those in this instance. And we can see that at 9.0 we're sticking around 290k in fortification bonuses. Your armor damage is pretty low, but here the personnel damage versus infantry, things like artillery, we're looking at 165k. So, yep, it's a pretty hefty bonus you're getting there. And of course we can see the troop speed of 59 kilometers an hour. Where does that sit in the grand scheme of things? So if we just look at the 8.1 for silver, you'll see the troop speed is 48. Now if we compare that to let's be vicious. Troop speed of the fastest unit is 60. 56, so you are not going to outrun these two units. But you are going to outrun the fastest MBT, which means you're going to outrun all the other MBTs. And you're certainly going to outrun all of the other artillery pieces and also the infantry. So we know that you're not going to outrun a light tank, you're not going to outrun a helicopter. So these things you are going to have to just simply avoid. And you're probably not going to outrun the slow helicopter either. Okay, so I'd thought long and hard about this, and I'll explain, as I always do at the end in the summary, how this is going to work. But for our first officer, we're definitely going to need War Machine. There's a couple of reasons why we need him, because he gives a buff to reload time. Now, the initial load time can't be reduced any further than 2 seconds, but we're not interested in the initial load time. We're interested in any subsequent shot we may need to take. So this is obviously going to be a unit that we're going to use to drive around, flank and snipe with at range. So on the odd occasion, you're going to need to fire more than one shot. So we're going to need him as the captain. Why do we need him as the captain? Well, while we do get a particularly low coefficiency, which is not going to help the situation, we are going to get a load time reduction from the officer's troop by 10% for 8 seconds. So we're going to get a nice chunk off of the next reload. Now, we are going to be stacking quite heavily towards that load time, as well as some other skills, which you can probably see I've already put in this little box here. So damage intensity is going to be a big one for us. We are going to need that, and so is firepower. These just go without saying. What we're looking for is for that initial hit from the unit damage from the rockets to deal as much damage as possible. Okay, and any subsequent shot is going to need to deal a lot more as well. Now, you're not going to need a vast amount of skill damage from an RL in order to deal damage to an enemy battery in order to wipe it out. So we don't need high amounts of skill damage. What we need is the little extra buffs we can pick up along the way, including a load time reduction of a further 10%. So let's have a look at the trained skills. We've gone for a normal attack boost. Yes, there is a critical bonus in there, but we are interested in anything that will give us a damage intensity bonus through a special, or in this case a normal attack boost, which, as I have stated before, is a damage intensity increase specifically aimed at the normal attacks. And as we are looking at dealing normal attack damage out in the field, we're going to need this skill. We're going to need Meld into the Shadows, obviously from Rapier. It's an incredibly good skill. Next up, we're going to need this damage intensity bonus, or any damage intensity bonus that we can fill in on the side here for the secondary skill. It doesn't have to be declared strike, as long as it's a field usable damage intensity bonus. There are some damage intensity bonuses that are only usable while garrisoned, or you get extra for being inside your own territory, for example. We're not really looking towards those. We're looking for the ones that we can use outside of the base, out in the field. So keep that in mind. Now, those of you who have been following my posts, been in my Discord, ever spoken to me, know, or if you've been here a very long time, know I famously don't like this officer. I think she's a bit useless. However, we have a use for her today, and that is specifically for the one reason everyone likes this officer, and that's the +1 map grid. One of the biggest failings of the RL is a low map grid radius. Now, we're trying to attack enemy units at range. We want to increase that range as much as possible. And as always with these unit builds, we do not look at limited officers. We do not look at lounge officers. We look at officers that we can achieve through free-to-play means that that anyone can achieve. Now, obviously, if you want to use a lounge officer that provides you with the same ability, that is even better, fantastic, go ahead and do that. But for the purpose of this video, we are specifically after the +1 map grid to increase that range on that RL to give us an edge over the enemy artillery, because if they see you coming, they will turn the gun on you, and that one map grid is going to erode your bonus time reduction on initial firing. So if we can engage at the same range at the same time, we're going to win. Obviously, we have a coefficiency of a straight up 1500 once you take that 25% into account, so it's not going to be particularly fantastic, but it's not going to be terrible either. You know, we're taking a 1300 and a 1500, so we're going to be just below that 3k mark, but over 2 officers. But as I said, that's not really the goal of this unit. It's not going to be to drop as much hate on the target as possible using skill damage, like using the splash damage options of Fist, Argent Flame and Stinger Fist. This is going to be geared towards the unit damage specifically as a hit and run piece. We do get a damage intensity bonus while garrisoned inside the base, but unfortunately that's unavoidable as we do need the +1 map grid more. We get a firepower buff, which is very good. We also get a skill damage boost, and that's whenever an officer's skill damage is being calculated. It will also be affected by the attacker's officer skill boost and the defender's officer's skill resilience, and the officer skills include tactical skills, passive skills, awakened skills, and conquest skills. Officer skill boost only affects damage from these types of skills, so we can get a little bit more skill damage. We're just squeezing a little bit more. Now obviously if we're gonna drop a little bit of skill damage after say 10 seconds of fighting, you can target. The third one's going to get hit with a skill shot, and it's just going to be deleted off the map pretty much straight away. If not, it's going to be close to. So this is kind of a useful skill. Now, on to the trained skills. So let's just amend the mistake I caught in editing really quickly, because I always make the same mistake, and it was pointed out in another video. So obviously for the balanced skill, we would like firepower and HP. Now I always end up showing the same one, so I'm just adding this in. We don't want the one from Uncle, because that doesn't work with artillery. Any firepower, HP balanced skill, that's what we're looking for. I caught it this time, and I even changed my shirt. As always, these are just guides. giving you the tools to make your own decisions. This one is kind of important as we're getting a damage intensity by 20% and it goes up by an additional 5% if you're in an RL. So as you can see, that is quite nice. However, we have already lost out on 25% here, so it is kind of needed if you are not using vent on a siege gun because you don't have a siege gun, then you're going to need to put him on the RL at least as a trained in skill. Now, officers worthy of note. We could have gone with Berserker Bear as the captain. We do get a nice chunk of HP. We get a nice chunk of firepower. We do get a reduction in prep time. We could even train this skill in as the special if needed. And obviously we get a chance to put burning on the target if we if the artillery officer troop has a 30% chance to inflict burning on the target for 4 seconds. It doesn't specifically state whether it's a normal attack or whether it's a skill attack, but you know, if you don't want to use the load time reduction and relatively low skill damage from War Machine, consider a Berserker Bear instead and train in the load time reduction skills or damage intensity skills that you desire elsewhere. It's very rare I will bring up a third officer in a video, and that is because I struggled with this build in a free-to-play format. It's a very difficult build to make work, but you do need the +1 grid. That's unavoidable. So that just leaves you with a choice of captains, because you don't really need Champion of the People in as a captain. You want a good tactical skill coming out of the gate first with the captains, and this is a very good tactical skill as we get a blast boost buff, which is going to be great in a counter battery fight, but what we are sacrificing is the load time reduction of any subsequent shot. So it hinges on whether or not you would rather personally hit hard once with a skill shot, which you then have to load, or whether you would rather have the potential of subsequent shots after the initial skill shot has gone off. So, flip a coin. Summary. What is it we're really using this for? To drive around and harass enemy artillery. To pop out, fire a single shot at units that are passing by, and then change target immediately to have that lowered time for firing, so we can just keep that load time low as possible. You know, howitzers, they get a load time reduction for sitting on a single target longer, which makes them really good at hitting bases. This is really good at hitting units. I'm sorry, but it is. It's great out in the field. However, it's as great as it is terrible, because while we can look at the load time reduction for being able to target hop as being an absolute massive advantage, these units are weak. They can be bombed very easily, which is why you need the blast damage and HP on them. The blast damage mitigation, the damage resistance and resilience, and the HP on them, because they can get sniped out so easily from the sky, and they can be absolutely eradicated very quickly by a helicopter or a light tank. So when you're using this, you have to keep an eye on it. It's not something that you can really sort of rely on. In terms of field artillery, I would say that the RL is pretty much second to none. But again, it always comes at the cost of how weak it is when it's getting shot at. So when you're using this and you're using its build, you're always going to need a +1 grid, or you're going to need something that's going to really increase your damage intensity. Because without the +1 grid out in the field, these RLs are not particularly good. I know I've shown you the battle reports. These can deal damage out in the field without the +1 grid, but if that player was online, no chance. So +1 grid. I can't stress it enough. If you're going to use the RL, make sure that you've got it moving quickly. You've got the load time bonuses that are available to you through your training, through your train skills and through your tech trees, because they are going to be absolutely imperative in the success of this unit out in the field. Once you've fired off a salvo, you need to switch target or run away. It is a straight up hit and run unit. And as I said, you can either go for Berserker Bear and Champion of the People, or War Machine and Champion of the People. Now, I decided to show you War Machine rather than Berserker Bear, but it is a personal preference as to I would rather have in a sustained fight the subsequent shot, if I need one, to have a slightly lower load time rather than a potential chance on hit to get a load time reduction, which is what Berserker Bear offers. Now, arguably, I can train that skill in, but I would rather, in both situations, personally, have the normal attack boost, so the initial strike from the RL, which cannot be reduced any lower than it currently is, to deal as much damage to the enemy as possible. So, is this a good unit defensively? No. Is this a good unit against an enemy base? Well, it's better than throwing sticks at them, that's for sure. It's going to be better than a tank. It's going to outperform an ATG attacking a base, that's for sure, with a 350% bonus and the fact that you're going to be able to just keep loading off shots. Is it going to be the best at either of those? It's not. It's just never going to be the best at either of those. But what this is going to be the best at, with the +1 map grid and the load time reductions, is it's going to be the best at driving up to the other enemy artillery pieces and launching shells at them from the rear, from the side, or even in a head-on fight. It's going to be better. You're going to be able to drive out of range as soon as you've launched those shots and shoot and scoop, baby. It's going to be good for it. I do use this as a shoot and scoop, but I don't have a +1 map grid on it, and it drives me insane. Obviously, those of you who have been following my Officer Awaken and Unlock, I am using my drinks at the moment to get Darkwing. And once I have Darkwing, I am going to turn my attention towards getting a +1 map grid officer, which I think there are 2 now available for me to choose from in the officers lounge. And once I've done that, I will pick whichever one is better out in the field. This is a field piece. It's always going to be a field piece. It's never going to be brilliant at attacking enemy bases. It's never going to be good at defending your own base, just because the load time is so fickle and the overall firepower is so low, so the skill shots just don't deal as much damage. Now, I know there's going to be someone out there in the comment section going to be like, hey, my fucking RL deals 200 billion damage. I'm like, I don't care. I do care. I do care, but like, you've focused on doing a specific task with that RL, and that's what these videos are for. I am focusing on getting you the best field RL possible here, and the RL is good in the field. It's a great donor unit, but it works much better when you manipulate it, because you've donated your artillery, you've donated your helicopter, you've donated your tanks, and you're left with like maybe a couple of units that you want to use personally. Just get rid of everything else and use the RL. You know, comes in handy. And when you're under attack, you can withdraw that to your base, and yeah, it's not gonna really defend your base better than any of the other units, but in a pinch it's better than nothing. Anyway, I've been the Smoking Cheddar. This has been an exceptionally long recording. I am now thirsty. It is hot outside. It is during the day, as you can see from the lovely sun that's on my face. You've been very patient. Thank you for that, by the way. There will be a link in the description box down below to the Discord. If you decide to join the Discord, please remember to be an adult about it. We say a lot of mean things to each other. No, we don't care. Most of the time I'm being bullied by someone if I'm not doing the bullying. As always, thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll get this out before the weekend, but no promises.